You're listening to Drinks and a Movie with your host, Rudy. Spoiler alert.
Drinks and Movie Podcast. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. I've got a super special guest here. This is one of the bucket list cinematographers I've been dying to get on this show. He's got two amazing horror films out right now that came out this year, X and Pearl. Joining me today is Eliot Rockett.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much.
I don't know what to say. That's super flattering. Thank you.
Well, thanks, man. Right now, we're pretty stocked on drinks. We got some Anderson Valley IPA, some tequila soda, some Bullet 12-year rye, so we're good to go.
Yeah, water too.
Yeah, water. Yeah, always got to have water. Yeah. So, we were just talking. I actually kind of want to continue this part of the conversation. So, you just flew out here today, right? And you said you're doing color correction on a show you've been on?
Yeah. So, I live in Portland, Oregon. I got up at 5:30 this morning, flew down, LAX, rental car, into Hollywood to go do color correction on season 2 of Perry Mason for HBO. I shot 3 episodes of it or something, and we're just getting around. I was finished in June, but we're just getting to the final color correction for that. So I was in the color correction suite from, noon to 6. Then I just went and got some tacos on my way here. The amazing taco. I was going to go to Guisado's on Sunset, but then I realized I was driving past the mobile station at Melrose and Vine, and there's this taco truck in that parking lot that I don't know why I know, but it's so amazing. So it was whipped in there, got
Melrose
tacos.
And Vine. All right,
it's really good. I think it's called La Habanerito or something, or it's I don't know, but it's outstanding.
Right on, man. Well, thanks for being here after all that. Really
a big LA day, yeah.
Man. So I guess I want to go back and learn a little bit more about how you got started and everything. But since you just brought up shooting TV shows like Perry Mason, I know you did Snowfall as well, and a lot of other television. I guess for you, what are the big differences between doing television and doing movies? Feature films.
The TV thing started for me, I guess it was about 10 years ago, on the NBC show Grimm that was shooting in Portland, and I lived there, and I, by a stroke of huge luck, I ended up on the show, and that was I shot randomly one episode of CSI before that. But the Grimm thing, I ended up doing 54 episodes of it over the course of 6 years or whatever. And it was a huge learning curve. It was just whoa, I was, had already been shooting stuff for many years, but just sort of 2 feet into that world all of a sudden was wow, this is a steep curve.
Yeah.
And, at this point now, when you're on set and you're setting up a shot and dealing with the things you deal with, and even when you're prepping and all of that sort of stuff, it's super similar. You're still doing the same thing. There's some sort of fundamental difference, though, in the fact of the structure of television is still such that it's the showrunners are generally writers. The directors are generally guest people that are coming in doing an episode or a couple episodes or something like that. So and as the director of photography, or I'm, say the production designer or something like that, you're kind of more in charge of this ongoing thing that will sort of, directors will flow through, and it's kind of you sort of, in some ways in TV, you kind of have more control almost, because it's you're kind of left to just okay, it's you who does the photography completely, whereas on a feature, at least my experience with features have been, in essence, they're much more collaborative. You're much more especially the stuff that I've done, which is, for the most part, independent features, and where you're definitely, working usually with, writer, director, that sort of thing. And on the creative side of things and the work side of things, it's generally sort of more of a collaborative effort in the feature thing for me. Although I don't want to discount the collaboration that does go on in TV, in the episodic sort of world where you just have a director coming in, because there's still a very tight and interesting and good, satisfying creative collaboration that can happen there. It's just somehow kind of different because they don't really have the last word, you know.
Right.
But, in the end, rehearsing, setting up shots, trying to figure out what's next,
Is it difficult to come into a show like one that's already established where there's already a look and then you have to because you have to play within that sandbox that's already been created,
Yeah.
right? Like how does that work out when you're going from show to show?
You know, all the shows that I've done so far, all the TV, there was Grimm. I did a season of Mr. Mercedes, did a few seasons of Snowfall, did the season of Perry Mason. All of them were, as you said, things that weren't the first season, wasn't just getting established.
Yeah.
So, there's this sense that like, okay, this person's going to turn in this show. They don't want to like be surprised and like go like, what am I watching? This doesn't look like the show I watched last week or whatever,
Right.
So, but inevitably too, like you bring something to it that's you that, you can do your best to sort of make the world be the way it's supposed to look, the way you see how the show is, but inevitably you will do your thing, and to some greater or lesser extent that'll be visible in the show, as opposed to a feature where you're like sitting down, you're going, okay, we're going to start from scratch. What is this going to look like? How are we going to do this? So in some ways, like mimicking a show or falling into a style or something and trying to bring a little bit, something to it that it doesn't, derail it or whatever.
Right.
Is a different kind of challenge on some level. But in the end, when you're doing a TV show like that that's been already established, so you're walking into sets that have been built, have been shot many times before, have certain kind of wallpaper on them, certain kind of colors. The acting, the cast is, the same people, costumes, there's so many things in front of the camera that are consistent for the most part, usually, that you're going to be faced with like 50% of that picture is already there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So it's not like you're just like, oh my God, how do I make this look like it looked last season? Because everything in front of the camera looks like it looked last season.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So when did you first decide that you were going to get into cinematography? Like, can you recall the moment that you knew this was what you wanted to pursue?
Well, I went to graduate school at NYU in film, thinking, I guess, that I was going to be a director. But prior to that, undergrad, at University of Washington, they didn't offer a double major, but had they, I would have probably had a double major in photography just because that's what I did there. And so when I got to NYU, the thing was that like everybody had to, in the graduate class, you had to use the people in your class to perform various functions on the student films you did, right?
Yeah.
And so what would end up happening is like 2 or 3 people in every class would end up being the people that shot everybody's films, because it was the one position that could kind of totally fuck up like your film if it wasn't done well. And there would be like a few people who sort of had the propensity to like deal with it,
Yeah.
I happened to be one of those people, so I ended up shooting a whole lot of student films, one of which went on to win the short film prize at Sundance in, I don't know, 94 or something like that, which kind of kickstarted a narrative sort of thing and started me doing, 1 or 2 like independent features a year. And then simultaneously I became friends with a guy who had a lot of connections in the music industry and stuff, and we started doing music videos together, and we would co-direct and co-shoot. And then when that partnership ended, I went on to I just like, well, I'll just shoot, continue on as a DP, because like I didn't really have the wherewithal to like deal with the music industry people on a music video director level.
Yeah.
I mean, I directed a few, but it was definitely like, this is much more my path.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. And so I think when it comes to like director, cinematographer for relationships, there's some that are, to me, like matches made in heaven, like Darren Aronofsky and Matt Libatique, or like a Michael Chapman and a Martin Scorsese, Andre Turpin, Roger Deakins, and Denis Villeneuve, and all that. And I think you and Ty West are one of those. One of those,
I mean, I hope so. It's been a great long relationship. I was just talking to him on the phone actually on my way over here. We met each other when he hired me to do the sequel to Cabin Fever that he got hired to do, and it was a movie that he didn't write, and it was like the kind of the first like job that somebody had, all of his previous movies like Trigger Man and The Roost and stuff were stuff that, he just went out and basically did himself, and we just got along, it's like I think we really just kind of, the collaboration is easy in the sense that like you know, it was never like, why do you want to do that? It was always like, oh, of course you want to do that. That's the way I would. It makes sense. Let's do that. That's a good idea. And maybe we see aspects of the world in kind of the same way too. Like in turn, like movie things, and especially the independent world. At different times it can get real political, and you're dealing with a lot of like crazy stuff. And I think he and I both kind of can navigate that stuff in complementary ways in some ways. Like in some ways, like I think he has strengths and then I have different ones that kind of help throughout all of the navigating of that. And I think, I can't speak for him, but it's like, it does feel like, as much as I think what he wants to do is a good idea, and, I see that, my contribution to it seems to be, he thinks that I have a good idea,
Right.
So, how do you really like parse it out? It's like, yeah, it's worked now for 5 films or whatever.
And so Cabin Fever was the first, because you also did, and I'll cut this out if I'm wrong, but you also did House of the Devil with them.
But that was after.
Right?
What we did was, what happened was, I had shot a movie called Liberty Kid with a director in New York named Eliot Rockett. And Larry Fessenden of Glass Eye Pix was one of the producers on that film, even though it had nothing to do with horror or anything like that. But Ilya and Larry were good friends. And Larry had been produced or was involved in like Ty's early films. And so when he was looking for someone when he got hired to do Cabin Fever, and he was looking for somebody to shoot it, I think Ilias recommended me to Larry, who recommended me to Ty. I think that's how it happened. I met Ty here in LA, and we did that. And then what happened was, after that, it wasn't a real positive experience for Ty, especially as the movie got finished up. Like Lionsgate, just like, what,
it was like taken and re-edited without his say, right?
Yeah, it was a whole thing.
And didn't he do what's that credit name, the Alan B. Smithy?
I don't know if he ever did or not. I don't know. Yeah, there was a lot of drama.
Yeah.
And so, but then it was like, okay, he's going to make House of the Devil. It was, a couple year or two later or whatever it was. And, he wrote it. His directing, it was a way for him to get back kind of what he felt he had lost, I think, in the Cabin Fever, because he had, a lot of credibility and cachet through the early films that he had done that all played South by Southwest, and he kind of was recognized as part of that sort of mumblecore crowd, and like a lot of critical acclaim and that sort of thing. That like, I think he felt like, the Cabin Fever thing could have slipped all that through his fingers, and so it was sort of like the stakes were high, but then it was, we did House of the Devil, and it went real well. And then the Innkeepers. And then I was on Grimm when he did The Sacrament and Valley of Violence, although I was still talking to him a lot and stuff. And then and there's been a lot of little projects that have kind of come and gone that were possibilities that he had kind of in different things in the works that ended up not going to thing. And then he had an episode or 2 of a Netflix show called Chambers that had Uma Thurman in it. And for one of his episodes, they needed a DP. And so he hired me. I did that with him. And then it was a couple of years. And then X came along, basically. He started writing it and stuff. And I was talking to him about it a lot at that point. And it was kind of one of these things, like he was just kind of writing it. And it was like, not sure. Nobody was really sure what was going to happen. And then A24 was real excited about it.
Yeah.
And, ball just rolled,
I do want to go back to House of the Devil a little bit before we go on to X. I love that movie. My friend showed it to me probably around 2012, 2013. That movie came out in 2009-ish, I think, right? So, yes.
Yeah, it's like 11 or 12 years ago now. It's a while ago now,
and I love the aesthetic of it, the 16 millimeter film. It felt like just the camera movements were so slick, the zooms. It was so... like reminiscent of that early era of 70s, 80s horror. And I've heard that you're actually not the biggest fan of horror films, right?
Not a horror film fan at all. Like, I won't just sit down and watch a horror movie, right? Like, I'm not, I've noticed like people who are horror movies, most of them are pretty hard. It's like,
Yeah.
you either are or you aren't, right? And I'm going to put myself in the camp of I'm not, right? However, I would say that like, what I appreciate about horror is that like so much of it is done through the camera. You know what I mean? Like a lot of other things, you know, drama or whatever, like you can kind of get away with like talk, you know, it can be just photographing people talking. And so there is something that like, I do find like that there are opportunities to do things as a camera person in horror that like kind of aren't as always, you know, available in other genre kind of things, you know?
Right.
But I'm like, I don't want to get down on horror. I mean, I kind of just like good movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The thing I would say about horror is like, I don't particularly like the feeling of being scared and
Right,
being made
right.
nervous. So like, so I don't, you know, pursue that per se. But like the good horror movies that I have seen and I have been able to deal with watching, I've been like, this is just a straight up good movie.
Yeah,
I just, you know,
for
it
sure.
doesn't matter what genre it is, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But
just-
don't quiz me on like, you know, details of Third House on the Left or whatever.
I'm just curious if when you guys when you do your prep, I mean, do you guys meet up a lot, and do you guys watch movies together and talk about like this is kind of the atmosphere we're setting, these kinds of camera movements are going to be within our vocabulary? Is there anything like that?
Yeah,
Or does
I mean,
he just have it all
there's a
planned out?
lot of that. Like,
Yeah.
You know, my experience with Ty has always been that our collaboration starts very early on, like while he's writing. You know, like I will get versions of the script, you know, the 30 pages of it, and talk to him about it, and you know, there's a lot of that kind of early discussion about just like what the movie is in terms of like, you know, where it's going, what are these scenes, what are, you know, what's going on, what's he trying to do, you know. And then when we get into more like the real prep, that like when the movie's actually, you know, happening, there's a lot of back and forth about like, you know, stylistic examples of things, you know, of the era, of the, you know, all different kinds of references, really, you know. And these days it's kind of become a thing of like, I mean, there's certainly some watching of movies, but these days it's like you get on the internet and like you can look at a lot of stills, which is really helpful, especially if you're doing something where you kind of want to emulate like a world of a movie of a certain era or something, you know. And because also, you know, Ty has a real clear idea about what he wants to do with the camera, you know, and the shots that should happen, you know. And so there'll be references that like in terms of like in X, or kind of the beginning when you meet Maxine in the strip club dressing room, and there's that like crash zoom into her face as she turns back, and that was straight up like he showed me this reel somebody had made of Martin Scorsese shots that were that shot, like there's like 50 of them, you know. And he's like, we're gonna do one of these for this moment.
It's like a dolly, and then when the dolly ends, you zoom in.
Yeah,
like something like that.
It was like a dolly and a zoom in, and and it was, you know, the thing too is like, you know, you could do something like that at some crazy part of the movie or whatever, but like Ty has a really excellent sense, I think, or at least a sense that I feel is like appropriate for where you do what you do. You know what I mean? Like that moment of meeting her, like snort cocaine and then whoop, down into it, it's like, boom, we've met her, you know? And it's like, for that narrative moment, it's like, it's the appropriate thing to do. You know what I mean? Later on in a different place or something, somebody might go, oh, it'd be cool to do this. And you'd be like, it'd be cool, but it wouldn't really like be appropriate. You know?
Does it convey information about the character or the
just the
moment?
emotional moment, like correct, you know, because any picture you're taking has some kind of emotional component to it, you know, any dolly move, any camera move, any sort of like, you know, evocative lighting or whatever, it's all done with the intention of conveying some kind of emotional moment to the audience, you know, and then the trick is to like figure out the appropriate time and way within a scene to make it happen so that it like just flows emotionally for the audience, you know, because you can wow people with stuff and, you know, that's just like amazing and cool or whatever. But if it isn't like appropriate, it's just the word I keep coming back to, then it's kind of like, well, so what,
Well, getting into X, I mean, so you did Cabin Fever 2, House of the Devil, Innkeepers, I don't know about Cabin Fever 2, but House of the Devil 16, Innkeepers 35 mil. And I was
Innkeepers was 16.
That was 16?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was 35.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure. It's been a minute.
And then it was 16. No, you're making me.
Yeah,
no, it was 16. Yeah.
And then getting into, moving on to X now, I was extremely surprised. And I don't want this to turn into a debate on film versus digital.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about all that. But I just think I was so fooled when I saw X. I was like, the aesthetic reminded me so much of House of the Devil, where when I pop in that DVD or Blu-ray, it feels like I'm watching a movie from the 80s. And I remember seeing the trailer for X for the first time. And before like Ty West came up in the name and all that, I swore I was like, oh, is this another like remake of Texas Chainsaw? I like looked so much like it. And I was so surprised to learn that you guys actually shot digitally, right? On the Sony Venice?
On the Venice, yeah.
I'm curious, like, what led to that decision? Because I was actually watching these interviews are several years old now of Ty, but being very adamant about film and that format and wanting to stick with that. Obviously, with the exception of The Sacrament, because what that story was. Yeah. So I'm curious to hear like how you guys came to the decision of feeling that the Venice was the tool to use.
I think, in the interim, in between like whatever the Valley of Violence and X, Ty had gone off and directed 17 episodes of TV of different things, and I think it just came to the point where the pros just outweighed the cons at some point. You know what I mean? Like this just keeps moving forward. It all keeps changing, and it's no longer the same argument. You know what I mean? It's still just two different things. But the technology and what you can do digitally now is to the point that it's like, unless you want something so specific out of doing a film thing, and there are certainly reasons to do it, you gotta, it's a big argument to make, and I think for a director too, we didn't have a lot of money at all making X, and the freedom to not have to worry about shooting, however many takes or whatever, is an enormous thing for one thing. And also just logistically too, we were going to be in New Zealand. There's no labs there. I think the closest lab was like in Thailand or something. And like the international shipping and like customs and like we're going to be sending all stuff that looks like porn back and forth. Like, there's a lot of reasons, and so X and then Pearl, we basically back-to-backed them, and it was pretty much the same camera package. And, in the end, I don't think there's any argument to be made that it was a mistake to do those two movies digitally, maybe some other project will come down the road and we'll do it on film again, but, that train is just getting further away down those tracks,
Well, does it change your approach to lighting at all? Because I guess with the film part of it aside, the way you guys light and compose your shots and everything, I feel like no matter what the camera, it's always going to feel like a nostalgic kind of horror movie. It always feels like it's of a certain era. Do you, light differently when you're doing a Ty West movie like X in comparison to say like television or other projects?
Yeah, I think everything has its own, hopefully its own overarching aesthetic. Right. I definitely think that like I could be said to have a style because I have certain things that I gravitate towards, certain kind of frames and certain kind of sequences and certain kinds of, where I like the light to come from and things like that. But I try, Ty's project or a TV project or anything else, it's like I try to approach it as like what it should be, and make it be that, and not try to impose like, I do things this way always, it's always got to look like a 70s horror movie. It's like, no, and, I think Perry Mason on HBO is a good example of that. It's like, it's a period thing, 1932 for this season, LA, and it certainly looks nothing like Pearl, which is
Right.
like, roughly the same kind of era. I mean, wildly different things, So I think, you look at each project and you try to understand your best in your mind, like what should this look like,
Right.
and then go out and pursue that.
Are there any? Sorry, I mean I'm going to get a little techie now, but are there any like go-to tried and true types of tools that you always want to have on hand? Like for example, like a Source 4 Lico is always in the mix or something like that.
God, there are certain things that like, I wouldn't probably be loath to not bring on.
Yeah.
Like, the Helios package, Astera tubes, like these days, it's like, how are you going to shoot anything without those? It's like, but, but you could,
Yeah.
you could do a lot of things without anything, there's certain, I mean, I don't know that I'm like totally married to any particular piece of equipment, because also, and it's a good, like X and House of the Devil really too, like the decision was kind of made to shoot those predominantly with lighting fixtures that would have been of that era.
Right.
And we cheated a little bit in X. There were some Helios tubes, but predominantly it was like old 4K HMI Fresnels that dragged out of the way far back of some rental house in Wellington. And wooden spot and flood, all kinds of craziness. But, I think you try to pick the tool that's most appropriate for whatever the end result you want. I'm a firm believer too that like any tool you use influences the way the outcome of what you're going to be. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like as people say, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? It's
right.
Tripods are like base level. The tripod is a certain level. Chances are you're going to shoot a lot of shots at that level. As subconsciously, just out of like, oh, this is just going to kind of happen.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it, just kind of gets more sophisticated from there. It's like, oh, if you have, tungsten zips through, with egg crates or something, you're going to do a certain thing, and you're going to be inclined to do it a certain way, that you wouldn't do with like whatever, like a light mat. It's different. You'd think about it a different way.
So when you guys were doing X, I mean, did you develop and create LUTs before? And that's something I don't know too much about. Is that something you do big in the process before you even begin the actual production?
Yeah, the whole LUT thing is, I'm a little of two minds about it. But like, yes, on X, and also the presence of a DIT is also something that I'm a little bit like, there's positive and negatives about it. But specifically for X, we actually started here, developed some LUTs that then we took down there, but then we ended up at Park Road and kind of redid things. And then when we were out on set, we actually had a really wonderful DIT, Martin, who kind of worked on the LUTs more while we were doing it. And, for a movie like that, shot digitally with a very specific sort of look intended, you certainly need some kind of a LUT. I mean, and with that too, like there's a layer of grain added and some defocus and stuff. And we actually were able to emulate that on set as well with a Q-take system, which I had never actually used before, but they had it available down there. So
can you explain that? I haven't heard of
Q-take,
that.
yeah, it's like a station that's used predominantly for playback and I guess like dailies management on set. It was the first time I'd used one, and I didn't get deep into it and all of what it could do. But our operator of it, Brendan, was great because he also had in the past been like a composite person for Park Road, and so he was able to do temp composites with it and stuff for us on set. And so, but it allowed for a like grain layer to be pushed into the feed on set, so we could actually be looking at on monitors on set that something that looked very, very much like what it was going to end up looking like.
Right.
And I might be misspeaking a little bit because like the Q-take thing plus what Martin was doing, I'm not can't recall exactly the technical details of like where things came into the system and stuff. But it was that's what we were doing. And so, so the LUT thing, it's like the problem that you can run into is that like you develop your LUT that you're going to use, right? And like, unless you're very careful, like your LUT might look really great looking at you like this, but then when you turn around on me, like suddenly the background's super magenta and you're like, why?
Yeah.
Because like the LUT just like skews in this really weird way because it's not like, hasn't been fully fleshed out, because the color science things were complicated, but it is a thing that, like, for instance, on X, I don't think we would have really been able to do the movie had we not developed a LUT to start out with to know, like, okay, this is what we're doing, And, on Snowfall, we had a bunch of LUTs. On Perry Mason, we have a bunch of LUTs that we did over the course of Snowfall, a couple of different seasons. We changed them a little bit because, for that same reason. It's like, oh, well, this one is, like, kind of working this way. It's a little bit more extreme in these sort of instances. So, like, let's go back and rework it and make it less like that or whatever. And likewise with Perry Mason, like we took the LUTs for season 1 and went back in and kind of made some tweaks to them that, to try to solve some things that kind of seemed like maybe they were not ideal. But it's complicated, It's like you can't just like slap this LUT in, go shoot a bunch of stuff, and then have like a thing that looks the way you want it to do,
Yeah.
It's like a way to get started to something,
Yeah, it's always interesting for me to hear people's like different approaches on that because I'm very much of this digital era of the last 10 years. So for me, I coming up, I always learn like, all right, shoot as flat as possible so you have room to fix it later and all that. And I remember doing recording with Natasha Breyer, and she talked about shooting with Nicholas Winding Refn. They did oh my god, I'm forgetting the movie right now. The model one. Why am I forgetting it? Anyway, but she talked about like creating LUTs for the Alexa and baking it in so that there was no like going back after. And I was like, man, that makes sense though. Like that's super ballsy, and I get why to an extent,
pretty bold, but
yeah, it's interesting. Just to hear
I mean,
thoughts.
I've never done that. Like even on X, like we're still recording in XOCN or whatever, like a raw file, what I mean, with nothing baked in.
Yeah.
But I come from a world like until I did Grimm, pretty much everything I did was on film, right? For like the first long time of my career. And so I find that like, I think people's approach who shot film back in the day, because when there were certain things you could do in the camera, certain, film stocks look different or filters, this sort of thing. But really you kind of had to make the world in front of the camera look like you wanted it to look pretty much, you know what I mean? Right. Much more so than you do today. And so I still kind of approach things that way. I kind of go like, I don't want to screw around with the image so much electronically. I want to like make the world in front of the camera look like pretty much like what I want it to look like. We'll screw around with it a little bit later on, but I'm not going to like, as you say, like light it real flat and really, and then just like rely on something later on. That's just not, I mean, there's too many years of doing it the other way. Yeah. And also, I think that would maybe lead you to being like, you could get into a lot of like, there's only so much you can do electronically that doesn't start ending up looking like you did it electronically. You know what I mean?
Right.
So somewhere, a happy medium is where to be, I think.
Now, was there a big learning curve for you, like switching from film to digital in terms of like just exposure and?
Sort of. I started segueing into. I lived in San Francisco for a number of years, and I really I did a lot of like corporate work prior to 2000 when like the first wave of like the internet companies and the giant thing was going on. They had tons of money to spend on things, and that was back when the F900 came out, right? And that was the first camera I kind of sort of started doing something like previous to that. Like everything was just like, digibeta and stuff like that. It was all SD, and it was really so much different than film. And then the F900 came out, and I was like, this is pretty remarkable. We'll do some stuff with that. And I kind of like went through a little learning curve, but it was a good practice zone, because it was like essentially corporate industrials, know, and so you could kind of like learn. And I think the biggest thing I learned, and it's still probably true today, is like in film, you worry about underexposure, and in digital or tape or whatever, you worry about overexposure. Right. Like that's kind of on a base level, like the difference in my mind, although it's not totally true anymore, but that's kind of because, when the clip starts to happen, it used to be worse than it is now, but like when things clip digitally, it's just like,
right, like a hard fall off.
Yeah, you're
like,
just fucked. It's like, oh, it's just a white blob, and there's
Yeah.
nothing. Sometimes there's like a little purple fringe around it, and you're like, oh man, Whereas a film is like, that window looks great 5 stops over, but goddamn, I can't see the person's face 3 stops under. And there's nothing I can do about that. It's just a murky mess when I try to bring it up.
And may I ask? I mean, why did you guys settle on the Venice instead of the Alexa or any other camera system?
I was first introduced to the Venice on Snowfall, season 2 of Snowfall, through Tommy Maddox, the guy I was alternating with, wonderful DP. He was like, we got to do this on the Venice, because the first season they had done it on the Vericam, I think. And I was like, okay, let's give it a try. I kind of looked into it and it was like, oh, this is amazing. And I haven't gone back, basically. I did all of Grimm on an Alexa, the original Alexa.
Okay.
And then, when the Venice came along, it was just like, oh, this is remarkable. Like so many things, 2500 ASA, just the color rendition, the internal NDs, a bunch of stuff that kind of Aries caught up with, I guess, a little bit now. But it's just sort of been, I haven't shot anything on any other camera for like the last 4 years or something like that, Maybe I should.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So now you guys shoot X. Great movie, by the way. I mean, I loved it. I saw it. We actually saw it together. I had my friend Adam here with me who helped me set up. I remember we saw it together. And then back to back with that, you shoot Pearl. You guys, so you reset the house. You're doing Pearl now. Completely different aesthetic. Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was just a big reset, and it was kind of like it was talk about doing it different ways. And Ty was like, "No, what we're gonna do." In the end, he was like, "We're gonna do this like Technicolor thing. This like Wizard of Oz kind of Technicolor-y kind of thing." And we just went down that road, And I gotta say too, on both those movies, our production designer Tom Hammock, so great, amazing. I love Tom, and he put stuff in front of the camera that, for the first movie, for X, made it easy to make it look like X. You put stuff in front of the camera.
right.
For Pearl, it made it easy to look like Pearl. And I think, with Pearl, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, and then maybe this is the sort of collaborative thing with Ty. It's like, he was like, this is what we should do. And I was thinking about it for a minute and I'm like, I'm on board. Let's just do it. It's like, to my mind, like the content of Pearl and the way it looks are like almost at right angles from each other, right? Like they're like, this movie shouldn't look this, or the movie looks the way it shouldn't be about this,
Right.
But there was kind of no like second guessing it, and that's another thing I think, like you kind of got to just like, well, as Ty would say, if you're going to get wet, you just go swimming. It's like, might as well go swimming, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, it could have failed, I guess. It could have been like, what the, this doesn't make any sense. And then, but, I guess to our credit, it didn't.
Yeah.
And
well, I think it fits in that pantheon to me of like different stories and everything, but like a Suspiria, Blood and Black Lace, like some Mario Bava, or like even like Peeping Tom, Michael Powell, like very colorful kind of horror movies with dark content. You know what I mean? And this has more of the like you said, a Wizard of Oz type quality, but I think it fits with those, again, that pantheon of horror film that is very colorful,
This is where I have to be like, I am not the horror film, so that's not really the references I can go.
Sorry.
But I mean, no, interestingly, those were not the references that we were talking. I mean, we were fully talking about like
Red Shoes, stuff like that.
Yeah, we were talking about like Wizard of Oz and like a bunch of these musicals from like the 30s. I'm blanking on their names even right now. And for me, Gone with the Wind was a big thing. Like you look at like the whole thing. I've said this a couple times to other people. It's like the like window with like the arbitrary shadow coming through at night of like on the wall of like, was like straight out of Gone with the Wind. I was like looking at stuff at Gone with the Wind. I was like, this is crazy, And I was like, let's do it. Like, I'm going to get a bunch of gobos for Licos, like tree gobos and window pattern gobos. And like a lot of the window patterns that are on the wall are not a light shined through the window. They're like a Lico down below shining this arbitrary like window pattern. And I was like, when I was doing it, I was like, this is crazy pants, but you know, it kind of looks great. And it seems like it's fitting and working, you know, like in the kitchen when they're eating and the windows are behind them, all the shadows on the walls are like the trees. Those are just tree gobos in Licos, like total theatrical style, you know?
Right.
And that just, that came like straight out of like a Gone with the Wind thing. And like, you know, the saturated colors and stuff is like, it was all those Technicolor movies that, you know, had nothing to do with horror for sure, you know?
And how did you, sorry, excuse me.
No worries. That's the beer.
Yeah.
I'll open mine.
Oh yeah, here we go. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for the beer.
Now, with this one, did you guys also try to use primarily tools from that era?
For X, it was definitely an attempt again, like House of the Dead, to kind of like stay within like technically lighting wise what they would have had. But Pearl, I threw all that out the window. I was like, no. I mean, first of all, it's like 1930s. Like, where are we going to get a bunch of arc lights? It's just not going to happen, you know. Right. And it's not. This is no. And also with Pearl, there was like actually kind of a complicated amount of like kind of light gags and things that, you know, lights turning on and off and stuff that we needed like a dimmer board and an op and stuff that like, you know, to do stuff like you do kind of in a modern filmmaking kind of way. And so with Pearl, I was fully. And I was also, after X, I was a little over like the busted equipment from like 40 years ago. I was like, I can't even deal with this again, you know, like literally like, you know, lift up on the hill in the middle of the night and X. And it's like, can we like widen out that? And he's like, no, it's just broken. It's like, I'm over it, you know. So yeah, I was kind of like, no, we're going to just go full modern on this and see what happens.
Yeah, well, it looks amazing, man. I mean, how much of that is, I mean, you're saying it's all about production design and your lighting, but how much of that was done in the color grade as well? I mean,
you know, it's interesting because both those movies got finished at Park Road Post in New Zealand while I was here, right? So the final color on both those was done, I wasn't involved with. However, neither one of them looks markedly different than what we did when we were on set. And again, that might be coming from like my world of like, I'm going to make this look in front of the camera like what it should look like. You know, I mean, they're finished now. Like Parker did a wonderful job, like, you know, tightening them up and putting them, you know, that last 10% over the line kind of thing. But definitely those were the looks that we were going for, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with that one, so you still had like a new base LUT, I imagine, for that one as well. That was like recreated?
We started with like just Rec 709, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And then Martin, same DIT, kind of tweaked in a little like amping up of like some of the reds and stuff like this, a little bit like, and then we just kind of went with it like that, you know? And then I think Park Road had, you know, like what they considered to be their like Technicolor look that they pushed it in that direction in the end. So,
and do you get pretty deep into testing lenses and using specific like vintage type optics for?
No, you know, both those movies were shot on the Vantage Mini Hawks. Their you know, Vantage does all the anamorphic stuff, and the Mini Hawks are a set of spherical lenses that they developed that have like some attributes of like a similarity to like a anamorphic, right? And Ty had been on a TV show that was using them and fell in love with them, and so that's what we did for those two shows. And we threw in some other stuff. I brought down like I turned them on to the Arri Ultra Prime 8R, which is rectilinear 8mm prime that Arri made a while back, and there's not that many of them, but that's the crazy like in
the bus, the van,
shot you're like in front, you're like, how do I see the whole van, you know? Or like when you're up above the shower and RJ's crying. I mean, that lens was not more than like 4 feet above his head, but like you see like the whole, you know what I mean? It has this crazy super wide field of view, but it's not distorted. I mean, it's a little bit distorted, but it's not. It doesn't give it away like a big fisheye would, like at 8 millimeters, in a full frame. And then I have like one of those Laowa probe, like prosumer probe lenses. It's like a T14 or something. Like that's what we used for like Wayne's eyeball getting poked with the pitchfork.
Sure, okay.
We stuck it in it, and it goes to a macro, so you can like get it like quarter inch from his pupil, and then pulled it out, and then ran it in reverse. But I don't get, like on Snowfall, we did a bunch of lens testing. Maddox was really into that, and we were at Keslow and looking at all kinds of old stuff. And, there's a lot of really interesting things. There's a lot of things that are kind of a drawback because it's like, well, this is a great set of lenses, but it's only 4 lenses, and the pulling focus with them is a disaster. It's like there's all these issues. And so, I haven't, and also like I have a real thing, I think also from the film days of like kind of like this sort of real consistency in terms of like lensing and keeping the sort of lens package real tight, so that like you're kind of using the same primes for the same kinds of shots and stuff like this. And so to throw like some other thing in the mix, unless it's like real specific, like that AR, I tend to not want to do things like that, know?
And these lenses, because you had zooms in X.
There's a couple of zooms.
Well,
we actually
are they the same, like the Hawk lenses? Or
no.
Okay.
Well, like for like when the van comes in and it's the it pulls out of the van and to see the whole, like as it's driving into the farm, and then it widens way out and you see the farmhouse and the van parking. That was like an old Ingenue 25 to 250. Although the 16 millimeter stuff in X, the porn stuff, we sourced an old Kawa zoom. That was a real project. In order to have it emulate like that little Ingenue 12 to 120 that would have been on his.
The Eclair, right?
The Eclair, yeah. And it was a really funky lens, and it definitely had like a lot of aberrations, a lot of weirdness that was like, okay, this is going to help with that whole, aspect of it.
Awesome.
But that, again, it was like a real specific thing. Like in my mind, it's like, it's real specific to the narrative. It's like, okay, we need that in order to do this thing because you're supposed to.
Right. The POV of their actual camera that they're making their film on. Right.
So, and I mean, I think, the next movie we do, I think we'll probably do them on the Mini Hawks again. But on like, Perry Mason, we were using, G series anamorphics from Panavision. I think they were G series. I can't remember, but
And so what can we? I mean, so I saw Pearl, Alamo Draft House downtown, and stayed for the end credits this time because I missed the Pearl the Pearl trailer in X. I remember sitting there and I'm like, there's no way he's gonna do this Marvel thing right now. And then my friends were like, yo, did you see the trailer? I was like, shit, I didn't. But, so I stayed this time. We get this announcement of Maxine coming soon. Have you guys started production on that? And what? Well, obviously not because you're here right now.
Yeah.
So never mind that question. But what can we expect from that movie?
Well, it's gonna get. There's a script. They're working on casting right now. It's all in the works. I'm not exactly sure when we're supposed to start shooting. I get one thing from Ty, a different thing from the producer, roughly somewhere in the beginning of the year. And it'll be in LA, but I don't know what their time frame in terms of like finishing it and everything like that is. Gotcha. I mean, sometime next year probably, obviously. But that's just a guess.
Yeah. And you mean finishing in terms of like the script and everything and getting the
script
green light
is done.
to go? Okay.
And it's greenlit and they're casting and they're, the whole thing's moving forward. I'm just not exactly, I mean, like whether we start, official pre-production like in February or March or April, I don't know, but it's like that kind of a time frame to get going on it.
And you guys are talking about, I mean, based off the teaser trailer, and this is some years later, it's like now we're into the 80s Hollywood. I mean, can you speak to, is there anything you can talk about in terms of that?
It's so funny because like nobody at A24 or anything has said like, don't talk about this, but I kind of have the sense like I shouldn't really probably talk too much about this, But yeah, I mean like, it's Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's that little teaser, basically. Is,
Yeah, okay.
You know, we're going to go down that road. Yeah.
Shooting some videotape. No.
Well,
No. Well, I mean, I guess to start wrapping this up, you know, where we've talked a lot about your working relationship with Ty West, but you've done a lot of television, like you've also mentioned. What are some of the big qualities, I mean, that you look for and appreciate in a director-cinematographer relationship?
wow. You know, for me, well, in the actual doing it, like I've had enough experiences now where like, you know, especially in the television where like, go out on the first scout with this director that like I met yesterday, right? And here we are in the van, we're going to go look at this location. And then it's either like we walk in and they start going like, oh, this, da, 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 and I'm like, yeah, okay, great. This is that, da, 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 da. Or sometimes they're like, okay, there's a big giant window here. It's all big white room. And they're like, oh, I'll put them in the corner here. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a hard one. But, you know, I mean, that's kind of a joke, but it's like, it really kind of comes down to like, can I lock in with what the aesthetic consideration is that person has, with what they're thinking this is about, what they're thinking like how this should work in order to tell this story, you know? And because I mean, I really take my role, like I certainly have, you know, a creative thing to offer, but I'm not the director. I'm not somebody who's going in and going, we're going to do this, right. You know, I can certainly help. And I can certainly, when directors are, you know, in trouble or whatever, I can certainly like, you know, we'll get out of this hole, we'll go down this road and it'll be cool. No problem. But, you know, you don't want that to be happening. What you want is somebody who's like, this is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. This is the way, you know, this is what we're after. And then I can get on board with that and make it better, you know, right. Or add to it, not necessarily make it better, hopefully make it better. You know, I kind of always try to think of myself as like, I want to be the value added person here. Yeah. You know, I got a lot of ideas and I also try not to like get too caught up in my ideas. Like I'm going to spew them out and then you can take the ones that you like and drop the rest. And I'm not going to, you know, for the most part, I'm not going to get too attached to any of them. Sometimes I'm like, really? We're not going to be so great to, you know? Yeah. But, you know, so you hope for somebody that like can play that role, you know what I mean? Can be like, can essentially lead, you know, in what direction we're going to go. Direction. And, you know, then, and hopefully it's with an aesthetic understanding that like me as a DP can click into and go, okay, yeah, I get it. We'll go that way and we'll make it happen. You know, I mean, that's kind of vague, but.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, no, that's great. I guess one last question. At this point in your career, have you considered trying to make a move into directing or are you just?
I don't know. You know, I mean, if there's been, I mean, there's different it's not something that I'm like actively like I'm going to become a director, you know. Right. It's definitely something that I wouldn't like if the opportunity presents itself. I'm certainly going to try to take advantage of it. I have a project that I've kind of worked on and developed for a long time, like a sort of miniseries type of thing that is like it's a period piece. It involves like, you know, 1920s Oklahoma and like Indian people coming back from World War I, all this stuff. But, and I just find it's just like, I'm not the guy who's so great at going out and selling something, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of like, and I've always found even, you know, since I was first started doing this, like the people who were successful at directing kind of have two skill sets often, you know, one being, you know, what you think of as directing and another being kind of this like ability to sell the thing, ability to get the job, this ability to like, you know.
Right.
And that's probably the skill set that I'm more lacking in. So.
Damn. Well, Eliot, man, it's been a blast. Thanks so much for coming down here, man. I know it's been a long day for you and love chatting these movies with you. Loved X and Pearl. Anyone who hasn't seen them yet, check them out. Go watch House of the Devil, The Innkeepers. Check out the television shows. Yeah, I think your work's amazing, man. I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Yeah. I like this place. I like the beer. It's all good.
Thank you.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank
Thank you for listening to the Drinks and a Movie podcast. You can now find us on Instagram at Drinks and a Movie Pod, where we'll be posting photos from all the various films that we discuss. You can also email us at drinksandamoviepod@gmail.com. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and thank you for listening.